Okay, so we're talking about Congress. First, let's start off with the idea of Congress. We know it's the legislative branch. We know they're going to make laws. They're the most powerful branch of the three. And let's talk about the job itself. The people who want to be representatives and senators, they get paid a pretty good salary. I think this is even old numbers. I think it's increased since then. And they get to travel back and forth. They get to be pretty important people and live in D.C. and have a staff at home in their home office and in Washington, D.C. And they get franking privileges. Remember that. That's going to be important for their re-election opportunities. But in terms of their overall ability, how important they are to the country, maybe they're not working for the money just itself. Because there's a lot of downsides to working for Congress. It's not very fun. You're going to be scheduled, every minute of your day. You have 6 or 7, 8 subcommittees. And if you're a senator, it's even more, maybe around 10. So you're very busy. Plus, you have to fundraise. Plus, you have to think about being reelected and all those kind of campaign issues. So it's a very taxing, a very demanding job. So what kind of people does it attract? Usually people who are going to be motivated by power. That's the biggest benefit to the job. Members of Congress get to make really important decisions that affect everybody, that affect our public policy. But there's 10, 14-hour days. You're not with your family a lot of time, and there's a lot of pressure pulling you in a lot of different ways. So it's a very stressful job. We know that these are old numbers, by the way, so you don't really need to pay attention so much to the numbers. What you do need to pay attention to is there's 535 members total, 435 members in the House, 100 in the Senate, 2 from each state. The only qualifications that it takes to be a House member is the Constitution says the only qualifications are you have to be 25 years old, you have to be a citizen for 7 years, and you have to reside from the state in which you're running for office, or actually the district in which you're running for office. Senators, you have to be 30 years old. You have to be in the American area for 9 years. The last 9 years you have to have been a resident in America. Plus, you have to be a resident from the state that you're running for office for. So those are the only qualifications that there actually are. So what kind of traits do they have in common? Well, overwhelmingly they're men. They're old, they're rich, and they're white. What kind of background do they come from? You can see that most of them are going to be lawyers, maybe businessmen or professors, but most of them are going to be lawyers. And all those kind of qualities that I was saying about, the old WASP, the white Anglo-Saxon, Protestant rich guy, is going to be more true for the Senate than it is for the House, but still pretty true for the House as well. If you are going to get reelected, or if you're going to get elected to Congress, the number one thing that you want to have in your back pocket is being an incumbent. You can see, based on this chart, that incumbents get reelected at a very, very high rate. The only time that it might not happen is when there are really big issues, people are dissatisfied with government, any of sort of things like that. Otherwise, incumbents have a really great chance of getting reelected because they have important things like casework. They're going to have important things like pork barrel spending. They're going to be able to claim credit. Plus, they're already having a background in campaign financing. They're going to be, name recognition is going to be a lot higher. Plus, if they're an incumbent, that means they already have some qualities that it takes to win. For example, if you're going to win in rural Texas, you probably need to be a Republican, and most incumbents are Republican. So you can see how this can kind of be a self-perpetuating cycle. So, who wins elections? Incumbents. Those who are already holding office. Most incumbents, or I won't say that, but let's talk real quick about the difference between descriptive representation and substantive representation. So descriptive representation means that you mirror your constituents. You look like them, you sound like them, you're all the politically relevant characteristics like your background, your personality traits are going to look like your constituents. That's descriptive representation. That may or may not be true. What we hope isn't true is substantive representation, that you're representing their interests even if you're not yourself just like them. So why are incumbents, why do they get reelected so highly? Because they're going to have more visibility, name recognition. They get to travel back and forth. They have offices and staff. They're getting their name out there. Plus, they get to use the franking privileges, where they can mail constituents information that shows them their name. It can't be campaign in nature, but it can be informative in nature, and it will help with name recognition. Plus, we get to have credit claiming, where we can talk about pork barrel spending and casework. About 90% of incumbents get reelected in the House, and the number is not as high for the Senate, but it's still really high. The reason it's not as high in the Senate is because they're going to face greater competition, because usually a state is a lot larger and it's a lot more diverse politically than just one congressional district would be. So position taking, you're portraying yourself as a hard-working, dedicated individual. That is helpful when you're trying to get reelected. Only occasionally, very rarely, will you take a well-known partisan stand on an issue. Otherwise, you're going to kind of play into the middle of the field so that you can make everybody happy when that's possible. You're also going to face weak opponents. And this is more true in the House than it is in the Senate. But incumbents are likely to face weak opponents. Sometimes they even face what we call a sacrificial lamb, where the other side knows they're going to lose. They're just trying to get the other political party to spend some of their money and their resources. So most opponents are inexperienced, unorganized, and underfunded, and thus more likely to lose. All right, so what role does party identification play in congressional elections? Well, most members represent the majority party in their district. Crazy, right? And if you're going to defeat incumbents, that's going to be pretty hard to do, because the incumbent is most likely the majority party in their district. So if something happens like a scandal or a health complication, or they die or something, that's when you may have an open seat. Maybe they retire. That's when you would have an open seat in which no incumbent is electing, and that's going to be a much more expensive race for both parties, because they both want to win it. You may get drawn out of their district. When we talk about congressional redistricting, we may face two incumbents against each other, or maybe just draw them out of their own district. So, how much do congressional elections cost? And this number has increased over the last 10 years. These are old numbers, but you can see incumbents usually are able to spend way more. The challengers way less. Now, if it's an open seat, that's going to make it a little bit more expensive than what a challenger is just able to do on their own facing an incumbent. So you can see kind of the idea here. Open seats are expensive. And do political action committees, or interest groups for that matter, buy candidates? I would argue no. I would argue that political action committees or interest groups, or anyone who's making big donations or helping somebody get elected, they're probably doing so because that person, if elected, shares their same views and will promote their interest. So I think PACs don't so much want to buy or convince or flip-flop one of the candidates. They just want to get candidates who share their interest elected. And I don't think it's necessarily as corrupt or as dirty as it may seem. Spending lots of money does not guarantee a win, but if I'm running, I sure want to outspend the other guy. Why is this a good thing? You might say that the incumbents winning provides stability. These people become experts. They become better at producing legislation and make the process even better. But if we want to change Washington, D.C., if we want to change Congress, the way our government operates, it's going to struggle if we can't get any of these people out of there and new people in there. So it's kind of a issue. So some critics suggest having term limits just like we do for the president, so the president can only serve 2 terms and then he's capped out. Other people are suggesting maybe we have that for the House of Representatives or the Senate. Okay, what does bicameral mean? You should know 2 chambers. We have the House, which has 435 members, and they serve for 2 years. We also have the Senate, and there's 100 members of those, and they serve for 6 years. The House, one special power they get to initiate all revenue bills. Why? Because they're directly tied to the American people. And at the time of the Constitution, remember, senators were appointed by state legislatures until we changed that with an amendment later on down the road. So the House, they're directly elected. The Constitution mandates that they initiate all revenue bills. That's why maybe they're more influential on budget issues. But since there's so many members, they get limited debate time. The Senate, with its 100 members and 6-year terms, they are more influential on kind of foreign affairs. They get to ratify treaties. They're also more influential providing checks on the executive branch. They get to give advice and consent on presidential nominees for the Supreme Court and the cabinet level. And they get unlimited debates, which brings us to filibusters and the idea of cloture and all that kind of stuff. So let's talk about the leadership. You have the House. The most powerful person in the House is going to be the Speaker of the House, and they get elected by House members, but it's going to be a member of the majority party because, after all, we're having an election and the most side wins, right? Then their job is to preside over the House. They get a really important duty in assigning people their committee assignments and in kind of prioritizing the calendar for legislation. On the Senate side, it's officially or constitutionally led by the Vice President, but they're not really going to be doing a whole lot. The Vice President is. It's very rare he's going to come in and vote in case of a tie. The really powerful person is going to be the majority leader. Again, chosen by the party members, obviously in the majority. Then we have whips beneath that. So underneath the majority leader, you would have a majority whip, and the whip's work is to make sure they round up votes, report the ideas and complaints of the party back to leadership. So they're the go-between between leadership and the rest of the members of the party in that chamber. The majority leader has to work a little bit more with the minority leader in the Senate. Why? Because each senator is really powerful, right? They can filibuster. They can place holds on legislation. So there's a lot more kind of bipartisanship, or at least cooperation, you would think, discussion at least, between the majority leader and the minority leader in the Senate than there is in the House. So most of the work that's going to be happening in Congress, most of the real work is going to be happening in committees. Committees dominate the congressional policy making process. They hold hearings to investigate problems, bring in experts, have this legislative oversight. They also have control of the congressional agenda and guide legislation from when it's introduced all the way to the point where we get to the floor and they have a vote. So we got 4 types of committees. We have standing committees, which are going to be permanent, subject-specific committees, and they are formed to handle or take in any proposed bills in that policy area. Each chamber is different, though. The House and the Senate, they have their own committees, they have their own subcommittees, and typically a representative will serve on 2 or 3 of these committees and 4 or 5, 6 of these subcommittees, while senators average a higher number. And remember, these standing committees are going to be important for who you go to come campaign financing time. Now, joint committees study committees that exist in few policy areas, and membership draw on both the Senate and the House. So these are more specific, and you have members from both the House and the Senate side, which is why it's called a joint committee, because it's joining both chambers in the same committee. Now, conference committees are formed to work out differences in a piece of legislation. So we got 2 different versions of a bill, one that's passed by the House, one that's passed by the Senate, but they're not the same exact language. Then it's going to go to a conference committee, and members are going to be pulled from both houses, both chambers, and they're going to work on producing a compromise for that bill, and then send it back to the floor for another vote. Select committees, I think, are a little bit easier. They're selected for a specific purpose, and it's usually maybe investigative in nature. The traditional example here would be Watergate. That was a select committee who looked at a specific topic, Watergate, the cover-up, and released a report about it. So that's a select committee. Committees work on 11,000 bills every year. Obviously, they don't pass this many. So these have to be sifted through. We have to narrow it down. And that's what the committee's job is. Every bill goes to a standing committee, but usually only those that receive a favorable report in that committee are going to be considered later on in the House or the Senate floor. So new bills get sent to a committee. They typically go to a subcommittee, and that subcommittee is going to hold hearings on the bill. The most important part of this is going to be the markup phase, where they get to rewrite, revise, edit any of these bills, change it, and then submit it to the full committee and then to the House or the Senate for consideration. So members of these committees will kind of serve as managers of the bill, making sure the bill gets through the committee and then leaves the committee, and they round up support with party leaders to make sure that this legislation passes. So they're the ones who are really knowledgeable. The other members are going to turn to for advice. When the two chambers pass different versions, some of these committee members are going to be appointed to the conference committee because they're really knowledgeable about this specific issue. Excuse me. So when you're getting on a committee, you want to be really careful about which one you get into. New members, they offer which one they want to be a part of. They indicate their preferences. Each party in the House has a slightly different way of picking their members, but most of the time the party leadership is going to be playing a key role, and usually it's going to be based on seniority. Remember that these committee assignments are being decided upon what's going to help them get, one, reelected, get them more influence, more clout, more power in Congress, and maybe, hopefully, some of them get placed to topics that they care about and want to make a difference, want to benefit the country on that policy issue. So they indicate it, and then the Senate, or the congressional leadership on the House side and the Senate side, appoint them to where they're going to go. Each one of these committees is going to have a chair, somebody who's in charge, the most important influencer on this committee. They hold the agenda. They get to play a dominant role. They get to schedule hearings. They hire staff for that committee. They appoint the subcommittees. They manage the bills all the way through to the Senate, eventually, hopefully, to the full House. And chairs, again, used to be chosen strictly on seniority, but now it's a general rule. But members could oversee voting in a different chair if they wanted to. Okay, a caucus is different than a committee. These are less formal. They are a group of members who share a common interest or a characteristic, and what they can do is apply pressure for these committees to work and hold hearings and vote for bills. So it's a way for these congressmen to maybe lobby other congressmen. That's kind of what a caucus is. So you have caucuses like the Black Caucus, Hispanic Caucus, Congressional Women's Caucus, or it could be regional groups, right? The Sun Belt Caucus, or ideological groups, economic groups. So it's really just a common goal. That's the way these caucuses work. So congressional staff is awarded to every congressman. Obviously, they work for the member. They're going to be providing constituent services, answering mail, providing casework, but some of them are going to offer advice on legislative needs as well. So the committee staff is different, though. They're working on the committee issues, right? Organizing hearings, research and writing legislation. They're the ones who lobbyists are going to talk to because they have input on how this bill is going to work out. You also have staff agencies that assist Congress, like the Congressional Research Service, the General Accounting Office, or the Congressional Budget Office. And the job of these different organizations is to make sure that the staff agencies and the committee staff have all the information they need to do their job effectively. So, legislation, what is a bill? Hopefully you know that it's a proposed law. Anyone can write it, but only members of Congress can introduce it. And when it goes through the House, there's a lot more rules and regulations about how this is going to work. It's a lot more structured. Why? Because the House is a lot more crowded. So the Senate's a little bit more wide open. This is why bills are really going to need to have good sponsors who are going to oversee it. So a sponsor is somebody who's saying, I am publicly for this. I'm putting my influence, my political capital behind this bill, and I want to make sure that it gets all the way through. However, most bills are quietly killed off early in the process, in the committee or subcommittee stages, and a lot of times legislators will use riders to pass a bill that doesn't have enough votes to pass it on its own. So if you attach this bill as an amendment to another bill that you know is going to pass, maybe you'll get done what you want to get done. So there's other ways of going about this. Presidents have many resources to influence Congress. Obviously, one of the linkage institutions would be this political party. The president can use that political party as well to influence members in his own party in Congress. And if he doesn't like something, the president has a little bit more power because he always can hold the veto card that influences legislation. So here is the number of percent of, well, let's just skip this. Let's keep going. Party influence. Party leaders cannot force party members to vote a particular way, but many do vote along party lines. So this is the job of the whip, to make sure that your party members are voting the way you do. Otherwise, they're not much good to you. So you want to make sure that you keep them in check, that you're having good counts, and you can rely on who you need to make sure that your bills are going to get passed. Most constituents don't know how their member voted on a particular issue, so there's not as much pressure necessarily to vote the way your constituents would want because they're probably not watching, very few, right? So a lot of times it's more important to vote the way your party wants you to vote so that you have better influence among that party. So that's kind of the issue. So back in the day, there were 26 lobbyists for every one member of Congress. This has obviously increased, especially around the time of the Affordable Health Care Act. There was a big increase in lobbying because that was a time in which a big legislation point was going through. Lobbyists can be ignored. They can be regulated by Congress. They can be kicked out by Congress. But usually it's not that bad. A lot of these lobbyists could be former members of Congress or former members of staff of Congress. And they're representing the interests of whoever's writing their check, whoever's paying for them. So they go to their old friends and try to get them to pass legislation. This is a way you can cash out after you're done nobly serving the public. They can also provide legislators with crucial information. They can give assurances of financial promise campaign donations in the future. So this is kind of what lobbyists can do. While Congress isn't a representative body, it doesn't necessarily represent just the people or just their interests. A combination maybe of the two. Congress tries to respond to what the people want, but it doesn't do a very good job, and I think I would argue that it's not supposed to do a very good job. It's supposed to have a lot of gridlock and dysfunction because we were afraid of government when we were writing the Constitution, and we didn't want a government to be able to be radical and very quick acting. We wanted something to be a little bit slowed down, to be a little bit more cumbersome and reactive and really think things through, or at least there needs to be a lot of political support for an issue if it's going to be passed. So the more policies Congress works on, the more ways they can serve their constituents. So there's an idea here that maybe Americans have different beliefs about what they want, right? They want balanced budget, they want low taxes, but they also don't want to see their services cut. They don't want to see any government programs that they like to get cut. So what this produces is, you can see kind of contradictory preferences. So you don't want to pay taxes, but you want the government to do a lot for you. So that's kind of the issue that we're looking at here. The more programs that get created, the bigger government gets. And the bigger government gets, the more help members of Congress get in the next election. They have more casework and name recognition. So it gives even people who, or even congressmen who maybe want to fight for smaller government, a good reason to support big projects. So that's some of the issue that we're seeing.